new planning board secretary, board of water commissioners, and whatever else they give her to do. But she is on board. Um, She'll try and answer your questions. It's a work in progress for all of us, but give her a little attitude and don't break her in all at once, please. Let's keep her around.
Jerry, I met her in the hallway and she didn't run.
Well, that's a good sign.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, were any lights on?
Oh, damn it. Yeah.
Oh, hey.
Okay. Let's kick this off.
Wait, there's no one else here?
No,
That's shocking.
Just a
I mean,
family.
good. That's great.
all right.
Yep.
Just so we all know, this is going to be a short meeting, number one. Number two, there is absolutely no discussion. Please do not even bring up a breath of a subject of ADU. You have it in your packets for one reason only, that I wanted to give everyone as much time as possible to review it. But it had to be advertised. It will hit the paper, Rebecca, this will be the first week and next week will be the second.
Correct.
So we will be able to make the very short window that we have for the selectmen to get this on the warrant. So I think that's all I really need to say about that. As
Cool.
far as the definition, particular definition of contractor's yard, it's on the agenda at the building inspector's request, as well as my looking it over. It is, I don't know if all of you have followed the Board of Appeals application process on this 1065. Basically, they upheld the building inspector's decision for a cease and desist.
Yeah.
And they have turned down the open space storage and light industry. And so they're back to a drawing board at this point. The building inspector, at the very least, would like to see contractor's yard by special permit.
Well, Jerry, I think that's brilliant.
I mean, how, I'm not gonna mention names, guys, but I did talk to a member who was on the board when this got passed. And quite honestly, I didn't get a lot of information, except we needed they felt we needed a place where people could store equipment, plumbers, electricians, things of that nature. That particular individual said to me that they never, ever expected something of this magnitude as far as a contractor's yard goes. So
Yeah.
I think, number one, anything we do at this point regarding either a new definition or adding to the definition or adding it as a special permit will not be able to get on this town meeting. We just don't have the time because we can't advertise it and get it on the warrant. So anything we do from this point on, as far as new zoning bylaws, will be for next year.
Mm.
And I want to, and this is particularly for the new members, and I'm sorry Beth's not in, but she must be off doing something important. The planning board, when we discuss new zoning bylaws, we can discuss it all day long. We can put it on the agenda. It does not become a freeze until we first advertise a public meeting.
Mhm.
So anytime we discuss it, the general public is aware that we're discussing a possible addition or change to a zoning bylaw. It gives the public notice that we're talking about it, so they can do an approval not required plan to freeze zoning for 3 years, or they can go and pull a special permit if it's required, or pull a permit prior to the first advertising. Once we advertise that the first time, and it must be advertised 2 consecutive weeks, it freezes the zoning. We have the hearing. We don't change anything. We vote to approve as printed and move it to the next town meeting. When we do that, it is only good for a 6-month period. So some of the new members wonder why we sometimes don't discuss things in July as far as the zoning bylaw goes, and we start in October because there's that 6-month freeze. However, in some cases, when we have a lot of zoning bylaws, we will advertise the bylaw. We will vote on that bylaw, and provided it is a majority vote, that stays on the books. All we have to do within the 6-month period is to have another hearing on that bylaw, and that will re-extend it for an additional 6 months.
Mm.
So we can leave it in limbo, or we can, after 5 months, re-advertise it, have a hearing, and it's good now for another 6 months, and that would pick it up and get it on the town meeting, so we have a freeze on it. So the discussion we're having now to Contractors Yard, hopefully we can get something together in the next, we won't be able to do it at the next meeting because the next meeting is on ADU. And I'm expecting that will go the entire night. Maybe the second meeting in May or the first week in June, we can come up with a bylaw change and
Or not.
then advertise it or not, and proceed from there. But I think that basically what the building inspector has said is, please, number one, at least go by special permit. And I noticed that when I was researching this a little bit, I felt it was very strange, considering that most anything that is not a residence, single-family dwelling, or something really simple in nature in our zoning bylaws were permitted uses. Other than that, most everything of any possible discussion was by special permit. This is not only, Contractors Yard is not only a permitted use in the commercial district, it's a permitted use in the C2 district. The C2 district is where we had the discussion, and for the members that weren't here a year and a half ago, when Nauset Septic did that metal building and parked their cars on Old County Road, just after the church, back entrance to the church parking lot, that was a permitted use, no special permit. But a tremendous amount, probably 85%, Alfred, jump in if I'm wrong on the percentage, is residential in nature. And so it struck me as saying something as something that seems
Potentially
simple.
egregious.
Yes, yeah, okay, there you go, David, thanks for the help.
Yep.
Could be a permitted use and get this far really surprised me, and I was always thinking commercial, and then when I saw it in the C2 district, I really started thinking about it and said, gee, when they passed this bylaw in the mid-90s, they really, I refuse to believe, they really took into consideration that something of this caliber could even pretend to go underneath that. So as it stands now, that definition is really wide open. And I gotta say, I know that some of you, in particularly Alfred, as well as David, had talked to the building inspector on some occasions. And Alfred had caught, and Alfred will jump in, I'm sure, that one of the only things he spotted that I know of was wheeled vehicles. And to me, I didn't catch it. Wheeled vehicles,
Equipment.
equipment.
Equipment, yeah,
And
yeah.
what was being brought in on this particular case on 1065 was excavators, which are track equipment, and things of that nature, which was a
Big difference.
big difference, but it was like, okay, we really had to get down. The only way we could look at this is to get down to the tires and say, you know, we might be able to keep an excavator out, but a big piece of payloader, which is a tire loader, could be parked there. So it's like, I really think not only does contractor's yard need to be special permit, but I think it really needs to be reeled in to say, okay, how many vehicles, how many tires, maybe a weight. And this is where Alfred pops in and it really is so good at it because he runs equipment that really refine it to a degree where we don't face this problem again. Now, maybe some of you are feeling, well, all right, where do we put contractors' yards? You know, to what degree? But that's the discussion we're going to have. But I think that I wanted to put it on, number one. I didn't expect that a bylaw would be written tonight, but I'd like to get an idea, number one, as to, okay, how many of you are in favor of at least making it a special permit? And number two, what are some of your ideas on maybe what other members might want to be thinking about in looking at a very simple definition, which is about 3.5 lines long, that really is, that definition is really the controlling factor is what somebody does. What do you think should be there? Because we've got contractors, we've got, you know, different individuals that use a contractor's yard, but also look at it to say, okay, it's got to melt in with residential because a lot of this stuff is bordering residential. Anybody want to jump in?
I'll go
David
first.
B. Fox.
Oh, go ahead. Let David go.
I'm just thinking about not intending to broaden anything, but I'm just thinking about the other related categories. So if we specify contractor's yard more precisely, which I believe we should, and maybe limit it for some of the reasons you mentioned or implied, Jerry. Then I think about, okay, bulk storage, open bulk storage tanks, light industry, heavy industry. Ideally, I would think if you add up all those, 6 or 7 categories, we'd want to be sure that nearly every possible use is going to be sort of governed by at least one of those. And so if we do something on contractor's yard, is it going to leave a gap somewhere between contractor's yard and light industry, for example? That makes sense?
Alfred?
No, I agree, but you got to realize that when contractor's yard first came on the radar, C2 was also new at that point. And what we had was an aggressive building inspector who was chasing the plumbers and electricians when they had more than 1 or 2 employees. So they created this contractor's yard, which was a rush to save probably a third of our townspeople's places of business where they were coming out of a yard or something, home. So there was not a lot of thought in this. We created a C2 district at that point too. And that's what we ended up with. And until now, or recently, it kind of worked. So I kind of agree with David Mead that we may need 10 categories, and I'm hoping we don't, so that the lawnmower is category A, the lawnmower and the wheelbarrow is category B, the pickup truck is C, and work your way through so that a large scale business, and I don't want to use the word, I'm not going to, with excavators and dump trailers and all that stuff, there is a definition that fits that.
Right.
And then there's something in our table that says where it's permitted, whether it's permitted through a special permit, whether it's submitted through a special permit and the planning board, whether it's by right, whether it's not allowed in any district except. Those are the questions that are going to be the hard ones to answer.
Well, and there's also the issue, do we end up wanting to say, thinking about all these categories, and you guys know more about them than I do, but I could imagine some category of some giant mammoth vehicle that is not going to be allowed altogether no matter what. How
Well,
we do that.
We don't allow junkyards. We don't allow certain businesses.
But how about a very large, like a mega-sized dump truck, let's say?
I think we already do that, David, in the sense that can be considered heavy industry, and we kind of, although we don't say it outright, we do kind of prohibit that because we really don't have the land area for that sort of activity.
And that would stop somebody from trying, potentially.
They could try, and I think this is somewhat relevant to the current case, but by de facto, we've kind of already barred that in the definition of heavy industry.
Yeah, I guess I'm just saying I don't want to make this a bigger thing than it needs to be, but that
Sure.
All these things relate to each other, and if we need to review the definitions of all these related categories, I hate to say it, it might be worth doing.
Well, I think David Mead Fox that there is, and I'm not going to simplify it certainly, but to Alfred's point and to Alfred's history, yes, that's how all of this came about.
Yeah.
It was sort of a quick means to an end to make sure that we were able to hold on to the plumbers and electricians. We have David Rowell, we have Alfred that works with both pickup trucks and heavy trailers and payloaders. And I've been in the construction business for years. I think that we will probably need to look to you now, David Mead Fox's idea that, okay, we may need to look at open space and a couple of those other definitions. However, for the contractor's yard to start with,
Yeah.
if we take an overall viewpoint, number one, it's by special permit. And number two, it either stays in both commercial and C2, or it goes to commercial only. But I think that the first step, because we have open bulk storage, we have heavy, now to David Rao's point, we have heavy industry, we have light industry, we have transport terminal.
Yep.
We can, as we do with home occupation, and if you read home occupation, we kind of specify doctors, lawyers, Indian chiefs as those qualify as home occupations. We do qualify now to Alfred's point that somebody can work out of their house under home occupation as a plumber or electrician. So one of the things I'm going to leave with you on contractor's yard, and I'm going to call when this gets deeper and on both David Rowell and Alfred, is to, okay, one way to see it that Alfred already picked up on was wheeled vehicles. Number two, we can place a vehicle weight on that, or tires.
Yeah.
You could limit the tires to 6-tire machines that are less than, Alfred, I'm going to pick a number, and I know I probably won't.
26.5.
Huh?
26.5? Is that the cutoff?
It could be.
It could be, but what you would try to do is you would try to take maybe what the town uses equipment and some of the other contractors who have equipment, who live on small lots, who work out of their home, and because they're attached to our community, haven't bought enormous pieces of equipment, and see how they survive. And I mean, I don't want to use anybody's names, but there's a couple of people in town who have been doing this for 30 years.
Yeah.
They're not a conflict with their neighbors. And some of the neighbors are special people who I know, but I'm just saying. And they survive. So, I mean, there's a point where they don't need to be penalized for this. We need to create a mega, and I don't want to say a mega category, but there needs to be a category that after it's something that, and I can't use the word realistic, on a small scale construction yard would use versus a mega yard. And, you know, maybe the dump trailer aspect of it, you know, I think that if we take the time to look, the rest of the contractors in Wellfleet, there's only one of them who's got a dump trailer. So if you weight restrict that, it can solve some of the problems.
Could we have a small contractor's yard and a large contractor's yard category?
I think you want
That
to
could be
avoid,
it.
I think you might, in my mind, you might want to not even go that far for the simple reason that if you keep, and again, we will work on it, but if you keep you just think about most of these people are your landscapers. They're running a dump truck, but they're running a relatively small dump truck. Alfred is somebody like
Let me put this in a different light for you, Jerry.
yeah.
Most of the stuff they're running on is on a Class D license, okay? So they can't drive the other stuff anyways. So if you've got
there you go. Yep.
So if you've got to hire somebody with a driver's license, excuse me, one step above the bottom, there's no sense in having the equipment anymore because they can't find the people to drive the equipment. So nobody's going to buy a 450 or a 550 in the 1-ton size because anything after a 3/4 ton gets you the next driving license.
Mhm.
So if I do gardens and lawns and cut trees down and that kind of stuff, I don't want to buy the big piece of equipment, even though it would make my life a little easier, because I'm not going to find the employees to drive it.
Right.
And that has been a problem, Alfred, with a lot of the small, even the landscapers are doing that. They go, I could use a big truck, but I can't get somebody with a Class 2 or a CDL.
So if I buy a F450, which isn't much bigger than a 350, and I put a small equipment trailer on the back of it to tow my Bobcat, I'm over categorized. So now I need
That's right.
to hire somebody with a health card who's doing a medical thing, and it actually has a CDL license.
And don't forget, you need a hydraulics license too.
Okay, so Alfred and David, for the edification of all of us, including myself here, is it the jump from the F350 to the F450 that did it, or was it to the F450 is okay, but the minute you put the trailer on it, did that cause the problem?
I think it's 10,000 GVW you start getting into issues.
Well, the trailer's going to cause the trouble because now the trailer weight and the truck weight combined will do that.
10,000.
If you put it on the 350, you're overloaded, but you don't need a license to be overloaded.
Okay.
It's
So-
ass backwards.
Yep. So there, David Mead Fox, there's a situation where you take basically a pickup truck, which is a 350. Most of us drive a 150
Yeah.
or 2500 or 250. There
No,
are
I drive a Toyota.
yeah, there
You know,
are
most of us.
350s, and I'm seeing a lot more of the guys not going to the bigger trucks, and now I understand why. But they're getting the 12-foot dump trailers to haul behind because they don't have a license problem. I think if we
Yeah.
looked at that aspect and said, okay, contractor's yard is special permit, we're gonna wanna know how many vehicles and we limit them. But under no circumstances does it go over 10 or 12,000 pounds. Now, you don't have to create another class because any other class is gonna either fall into light industry or heavy industry under our present definition.
I think that
It's a real
might be a bit.
simplification. Alfred?
Well, I think my concern would be if we had two different contractors' yard, just for discussion, and one of them was the guy with the lawnmower, and the other guy was the one with everything. That once you get the permit for the lawnmower, you're gonna straggle into the other category.
Yes.
Where
And now we
if the
got an
categ-
enforcement problem.
So if I'm a contractor's yard with a pickup truck and a wheelbarrow, and I do lawns, and all of a sudden I'm like, hey, wait a minute, I can start doing septic systems because I do the lawns and clean everything up at the end. I'm still a contractor, aren't I? So I think that we have to watch out that we don't make two contractors' lines where one is big and one is small, so that there's an enforcement problem from when you border from one to the next.
Alfred, who just got the special permit up the street from you on Holbrook?
Jeremy Young.
Yes. Jeremy's, yeah,
But he, and I want to be clear on this because I haven't seen all of it, he took a 10-bedroom unit, which was pre-existing non-conforming, and he converted some of that space into it. So he wasn't applying for a special permit without giving something up first. So
okay, but I was going more, I didn't want to get into the permit. I was going more of, he's running basically equipment that seems, even though he may have a couple trailers and a couple trucks, he's not crossing into that next heavier level of trucks, like, for example, Corey Brundage did.
well,
Corey,
Jerry,
giant step.
he went there
Did he?
And he
Black.
backed off. Yeah.
because he couldn't have the employees for the equipment.
Oh, that comes back to your CD license, right? Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
he did not want to go through the happy garbage to deal with that. You can't hire
Yep.
part-time people to do it without the license because the ones with the licenses want a full-time, and I'm not saying that that's what he does, but I mean, once you can't, it's hard to steal an employee from another business, because if they've got the license, they're going to do something other than work for a landscaper of that level.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we got into insurance and money and all that stuff. Because once
Okay.
you go up there, it's more to insure them and stuff. It's just only
Well,
so
it's-
much landscaping can afford. So
Yes.
So it's a whole different price bracket.
Yeah. David.
Yeah.
Meadfox?
Yeah, I got a question. I just want to be clear. So the special permit designation obviously is key, but just to be certain, but that means, let's say there's a special permit, however we define something, light industry, heavy industry, contractor's yard, the fact that it's covered by a special permit means that who actually decides what these words mean? What
the ZBA.
ZBA.
CPA
Yeah.
determines
Yeah.
something is light industry or it's heavy industry. And that's a
Correct.
it's-
Yeah.
Well,
because they don't
okay.
define, there's a lot of wiggle room in these things, really.
Which
Well,
is,
there
can
is,
be a
but-
good. Yeah. Can
Go
be a
ahead,
good
David.
thing.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's bad. I just want to be clear.
Yeah.
Yeah, wiggle room is there, there's no doubt about that, but you can't get, the Board of Appeals does not operate like the planning board. The planning board, we advocate when we do a subdivision, for example.
Yeah.
We advocate preliminary meetings. We try before they bring in a definitive, and they have the right to go straight to a definitive plan. We try and get them to come in early on a preliminary plan.
Right.
And there's no, if we say, yeah, it's a good idea, and you leave the table, we've looked at it on a preliminary basis, that is not a mea culpa and saying, okay, you're fine when you come back in here for the definitive.
Right.
It's saying you're in the right direction.
Yeah.
That works well with the planning board. It doesn't work with the Board of Appeals because they do not give out any suggestions. You decide when you submit an application for a special permit, what you're going after. You're going after open
Yes or no,
bulk
basically.
storage, you're going after heavy duty or light duty. You may ask the building inspector a couple questions, but the ultimate decision of what you're going for is what you submit the application to the Board of Appeals on.
Right.
The building inspector would say, I'm not going to give you a permit for this because it doesn't meet the requirements for this particular request. Normally, they go into the Board of Appeals for that, but he doesn't tell you what other things you have to go for. It's not his job.
Yeah.
So they pick and choose what they want as the applicant. They go before the Board of Appeals, and the Board of Appeals says, well, you came into us with light industry. And here's the list of equipment you're going to use in this light industry. You've exceeded what we think the qualifications or the criteria are for light industry. We're going to deny it. You better reapply for something different.
Like a contractor's yard.
We're not going to tell you what to do. Now you got to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, I may have to submit for a contractor's yard, or I may have to submit for a heavy industry. So they can't, if, for example, we said a contractor's yard requires a special permit. And we said, and the zoning bylaw passed the town meeting, that equipment cannot exceed 10,000 pounds per vehicle. And you can only have X amount of vehicles. You can only have X amount of trailers, and those trailers cannot exceed a certain length. As we did with home occupation, if you look at that bylaw, and that's what we did with that, is said, okay, you can only have 2 trailers and they can't exceed I think we came up with 14 or 16 feet,
Huh.
whatever we did. The Board of Appeals will look at that and say, fine, if you all of a sudden walk in under a Board of Appeals request for contractor's yard and you're gonna wanna park a payloader, it's not gonna fly. You're gonna have to come in with a different application, or you're gonna have to take that out of your application. Where Alfred was going is, when you get, I think, and I certainly won't put words in his mouth, but I think what he was saying, which we find a lot, is if you go two-tier, and it's not really clear, all of a sudden they go in for the easier one. Get it? Because once they get a permit and they drift up towards heavier equipment,
Then it becomes an enforcement problem.
and then it becomes, exactly, David Mead, it becomes an enforcement issue, which Wellfleet has been notorious on as to not going forward to look at. And we've got
That still goes
many of
back
those
to-
problems that are facing us.
It goes back to the issue of do we have bylaws that say what we want them to say, or do we always filter it? Maybe we do need to, I don't know. Do I always filter what we might want to see through the lens of enforcement?
What they did before I even came in 75, and this is where I have to go to David and Alfred, is when they established the basic set of our zoning bylaws that we're working off of in 66 and 76, they chose, because they were probably having a harder time to really finite these uses.
Yep.
They broad stroked, more than any surrounding town, everything by special permit, saying, okay, we can't dot every I and cross every T, but what we can do is put you before the Board of Appeals and
Yeah.
say, all right, they're gonna make the decision, but the caveat right on the whole top of this thing, which came back to haunt the applicants on 1065, is you can have these uses, but you cannot create a nuisance, hazard, or congestion.
And is that
So you
true?
may not be able to dot the i's and cross the trees, but you've got
Right.
this I'm gonna call it a bat. You've got this bat in hand to say, all right, you may get a little bit of latitude, but under no circumstances, if you reach a situation where we feel there's a nuisance, hazard, or congestion, even if it's an allowed use, we're gonna be able to say, no, you can't do it.
So that's true of a contractor's yard, not just light and heavy industry, right?
It's true of
No,
everything,
because
really.
Yeah, okay.
No, and that's, I think, where the building inspector said, number one, get it by special permit, and number two, give me some more criteria.
Yeah.
Because you got somebody that came in and said, I'm trying to make this as general as possible because it can be taped, but you had somebody come in as an applicant and says, I'm a contractor. Contractor says the definition says any contractor's yard is any contractor that works in the business.
Mhm.
Well, you've got cement, cement's a bad one, but I'll take it.
Could be an
You've got
asphalt
excavators
contractor,
just
could pave
like this, you've got
driveways.
excavators that run 18-yard, 40-foot tractors
Right.
with excavators and everything else. I'm a contractor. I've got a contractor's license. Now, he may also have heavy-duty licenses, but he's
Right.
also a contractor because he works in residential, but he also builds roads. Therefore, I got the right to go in there. Well, it's too broad.
Mhm.
So it's like, okay, you got to reel it in. What they were able to do on this is there's still some discussion between the building inspector and the applicant's attorney as to what they can do under the contractor's yard. But the Board of Appeals was clear.
Yeah.
And obviously decisive when they applied for open bulk storage and said, okay, that is an allowed use by special permit in that district. However, it triggered the nuisance hazard, congestion, noise, pollution.
Yeah.
We could turn it
Right.
down.
Yeah, yeah.
We do not have that in contractor's yard because it's a permitted use.
Well, at least right now.
Yes, but that's why he's looking to say, wait a minute, the total handcuffs are off when you go a permitted use. Because
Right.
nobody.
That's why he wanted to kick it to the ZBA, because they have the discretion, as zoning does, on a case-by-case
Case.
basis.
Yeah.
It doesn't set precedent. And that's the whole key to zoning. They have that discretion. Whether they exercise it or not is yet to be seen. They did in this case. But because it's somewhat vague, they exercised discretion and made that call.
Anybody else?
Yeah,
Funny.
so we are discussing whether or not, because you said is it actually too late to just fulfill the one request that the building inspector made of us, which is to change
Yes.
change the table from a P to an A, from permitted to special permit? It's too late.
David Rowell answered your question and says, yes, it is.
Yes.
Too late. Here's
Too
the
late.
simplest-
We are discussing, so I'm just unclear about the purpose of this conversation. So we're discussing whether we want to work on a zoning bylaw for a contractor's yard
Yes,
that has more specific definitions, if I understand
yes,
everybody. And that also has, and also changes it to special permit. But the main thing is to do the same level of detail that the bylaws have in the home occupancy. Is that correct?
yes.
Or it could be as simple as leave it alone and make it a special permit and let the board decide the criteria. It
Right.
could be as simple as that, or we could come up with more criteria. It could be one or either. It's not, you
Or a
know,
combination of both.
exactly, yes. It could be a
But,
combination
Tony,
of both.
Yeah.
Nothing is ever as simple as whether or not you write an entire, I'm not picking on anything,
I know.
whether you write an entire new bylaw like an ADU,
Uh-huh.
or you change a simple permitted use in the use table to a by special permit,
Mhm.
it has to go through and meet all the time restraints, no
Right.
matter what. You
Right.
know, it's not just, oh, this is simply dotting an I. Can we do this immediately? No, the problem with it is, even with the ADU, we are on sketchy grounds because theoretically the warrant was supposed to close and go to the printer in the first week of May. We're not hearing this case until the 7th of May.
Uh-huh.
So we are out of time completely. If I had not sent, when I got this on Wednesday morning and called Rebecca on the phone and said, listen, we've got a zoning bylaw that's been forwarded to us, and I put it on this agenda to find out whether you want to advertise it, which we have to anyway. We wouldn't be meeting until the second week of May, which is way too late.
Right.
We had to get it in, so
Okay.
we did it.
Yeah.
So time is of the essence, is basically it. So I think
Because
this-
it's ultimately, Jerry, it's a shotgun wedding with the ADU law.
Yeah.
Call it what it is.
it's late, but
It's a
we were able to
shotgun
get
wedding.
it in, and we'll discuss it, we'll discuss it. But that's the problem with any zoning bylaw, whether it's something as simple as changing a capital or whatever, it is all in a timely manner.
Yeah.
And that's what we're out of time with. So
Okay.
it's a matter of, I think, with potential zoning bylaws, because we never know what we're gonna deal with next year. With potential zoning bylaws like we've done in the past, if we can start getting some of these out of the way earlier,
Mhm.
have the hearing when we don't have pressure, put it on the books as a freeze,
Right.
and then revisit and simply re-advertise and extend it for the additional 6 months. We get that work over, done with. We've also got additional time to say, okay, did we really vent it as much as we needed to? And did something all of a sudden come up where, let's have that new hearing, but let's see if we need to change anything.
Mhm.
Is that like the second blue pill?
Yeah, David.
Okay, I was just checking.
So I think let's move on from there, but let's at least leave it that. I think you all now understand, you've got the input from the building inspector, as he would like to see. He would like to see more clarity. Now that you've got David Growls, you've got Alfred's input as to size of vehicles, weights, we can always play with them, but I think now's the time to kind of, because it won't be at the next meeting, because that, as I say, is going to be all ADU. But that second meeting in May, I'd like to bring it up again, get it on the agenda. Because we really need to come to, we will have to have a decision on the ADU at that next meeting. So let's.
I got
everybody
one more,
agree with
Jerry,
that?
quick.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Alfred.
As far as the weight goes on vehicles, the Conservation Committee, unless I'm wrong, we're not allowed on a shellfish grant with a vehicle that weighs over 8,500 pounds. A full-size pickup truck with a lot of gewgaws on it is pushing the limit. When you do a seawall, as part of their order of conditions sometimes, they will pick the equipment you can use to do the work on the beach according to its weight. So to look at a weight thing is not something new in the town of Wellfleet. So that for the other board members, what I'm telling you is, depending on where we're working with what equipment, and the reason I survive well is because we use smaller equipment because it floats on the beach instead of digging into the sand. So when you look at some of this stuff, just look what some of the other contractors in town use and decide what you think is big, what's huge, and what's not, then decide what that piece of equipment will do. And then we can have a better conversation at that point, for what you want to do. But
Yeah,
I think
it's-
Yeah, but
Go ahead,
but
David.
Alfred, it also doesn't necessarily mean the size of the equipment, because I think the bozos got stuck with the shark rescue vehicle out on Newcombs, and that's just a four-wheeler.
Oh, I've watched I'm going to say an applicant that we're talking about go down in front of the yacht club with an enormous piece of equipment that should
And
never
bury
get
it.
and never get stuck, and he went right through where nobody goes, and a year and a half later, the tracks in the mud hole is still on the beach. It hasn't washed away yet.
Yeah.
And then they
Yeah.
sent an excavator to get it out, and by the time they got half of that out, the other one towed the other one out. What I'm trying to tell you is, if you're not vested in your community, you don't give a shit. And that's
Yep.
why, and I'm saying this, and I don't care who's listening, if you're not vested in your community, this is what you get.
So I think to look at that, Bonnie, and to all of us is, now maybe let's take a look as when those landscapers drive by us and when the plumbers drive by in their trucks and the electricians, see what they're driving, get a sense of, back looking at the visual. And if that's in fact what we all envision as a contractor's yard, then it makes it a lot easier for us to come up and say, okay, this is what we're thinking.
Well, it seems like what it comes down to in general, in a lot of ways, is the risk that's out there is for somebody to come in who doesn't know the ways of a small town, ways of growth. And because bigger, in many ways, it seems to be just logical, cheaper and fast. If you keep that piece of equipment busy. So you want to get, and presumably faster means the person can make more money.
Well, that, David, but also it's many times what happens when we get these kind of situations is somebody looks for loopholes. And
Yeah.
it just seems to be, in this particular case, a loophole in our definition that we didn't refine it, or they didn't refine it at the time it went in as well as it should have been. And it now needs to be seriously looked at and potentially amended. And when we look to amend it, how far do we want to go?
Well, but that's where I was going before with the 2-category idea, because we don't want to hurt home occupations or the local plumber and electrician, as Alfred mentioned, but we do want to strengthen the protections around a bigger contractor's yard. I mean, in a way, I can imagine driving around and seeing people's stuff in their home business. That's kind of like a small contractor's yard. Fine.
Yeah.
But we want to be able to have a limit on the big contractors' yards.
Well, that's what you have to do. I mean, you have heavy industry, and they at
That's
least,
what every industry does.
right,
Yeah.
that's what.
Well,
If they're going to take that giant step and they're going to get into, what is it, David or Alfred, the heavy equipment license, it's CL?
Oh, CDL.
CDL, if they're getting
plumber.
into equipment that needs to have a CDL license, you have now, and at least in my mind, graduated to a completely different level of equipment and size, weight, and potential noise, nuisance, and hazard.
But we don't have,
Well,
we don't have weight.
Can I answer David's, something
Yeah.
about David's
Absolutely,
comment?
David. Sure.
And David, since 1970 at least, there has not been a new sand pit or that type of activity created in Provincetown, Truro, Wellfleet, Eastham. All the ones that there are sand pits that are in each one of those towns and have been for 60 years, but no new ones have been created since 1970.
All
In
pre-existing
P-Town?
non-conforming.
Yep, in P-Town, there's Pinkies, right?
Yeah.
In Truro, there's the Pit. In Wellfleet, there's Kevin Rose's. And in Eastham, there's Roach's Pit and the cement factory.
And you got
But
McGinn
those
next to me.
Yeah, McGinn, I'm sorry, that one too. There's 2 in Wellfleet.
He
But
started in
there's
69.
never been a new one created in like 70 years.
Right.
Or 60 years.
So,
Play, you got them in, very large, normally very large areas, like, pits, as he mentioned, or you see them down in Dennis, or you see them
Yeah.
down in Harwich.
Right.
Yeah.
Where you
There's
usually
land
want these
area.
kind of things in 5, 6, 7 acres, 10-acre minimum, because you
Yep.
can bring that heavy equipment into
You
the
can screen the
center
noise.
to go. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on. I think you all got the gist of it. I'm sorry, Olga.
A question. You mentioned that the hearing is May 7th for the ADU. Did you mean,
It's,
Matt?
May 5th, I think.
I just want to be clear.
Yeah, 'cause it's a Wednesday, right? First Wednesday.
Wednesday is the 5th. but-
We meet the first and third Wednesday unless otherwise noted. So,
Right.
yeah, I thought it was the 7th. It's not, it's the
Okay, I
5th.
just want to make that correction. I hope we're going to talk about my email.
That's next on the agenda.
Okay, but if item 2 of that is something I would like to bring up with regard to contractor's yard, and that is, I don't want to be reinventing the wheel if there's a professional code writer who's doing this study of, rationalizing our bylaws. I don't know exactly what he's doing, or she. And I wonder if this isn't something that we could get some help with rather than trying to describe all
No.
this ourselves. No.
this
That's
is-
not what they do, Olga.
Okay, what is it? Well, we can get to it later then, if it's
Yeah,
not.
that's not what they do.
Well,
Yeah.
that's not even on the agenda right now.
It
I mean,
actually is item 2 of my email. I had 3 parts to item 1, and there's an item 2. I don't want to get lost.
I gotta keep this in order. Are we finished with contractors yard at this point?
But we're
Yeah.
gonna- Yes, but we're
Yeah.
going to,
We're gonna move, we're gonna have it, if the meeting is on the 5th, I'm gonna hopefully get it on the agenda for the 17th. Of May.
17. 14 days after the 5th?
Well, the third Wednesday.
It's the 19th. I mean,
yep, 19th.
We meet the 5th and we meet again the 19th.
Yeah.
okay.
The 5th is going to be the hearing on ADUs.
Mhm.
At this point, is Rebecca gone? Yeah,
Yes,
she signed
gone.
off. At this point, the warrant was supposed to go to the printer the first, I think it was supposed to go to the printer on the 7th of May, that first week, and I think it was the 7th. Maybe that's why I had the date of the
Yeah.
7th in my mind.
Good luck.
What, my mind?
No, good luck with getting to the printer on time.
So with the scheduling, ADU is scheduled in the advertising to be discussed on the 5th.
Mhm.
If a decision by the planning board to recommend, not recommend, or no recommendation and voted, and the warrant has not gone to the printer, our vote would be on, or would be in the warrant.
Right.
If in fact we continue that meeting, because we haven't fully vented it with no decision, to the 19th, excuse me, the chances are really very good, or should be very good, that it has gone to the printer. Therefore, on town meeting floor, I would have to give the report, which is done all the time,
Mhm.
as to what the vote was. So the benefit is if it's done in time, it's in the warrant, people can see it. If not, there is no vote on it, and then it would have to be, an oral report would be made on town meeting floor. I do not know, now to Alfred's, there is a lot of things happening where they're shooting for that first week of May. I'm not sure where we are at this particular moment in time. I will know more probably by that meeting. Depends on how much we get done. So therefore, I'm expecting that we would further discuss this on the 19th. However, if we do not come to a decision on the ADU on the 5th, and we continue it to the 19th, I'm not leaning right now to put much more on that agenda, because I really would like to get through it that particular night on the second night and just say, okay, let's go for it. We got to get this done.
Mhm.
Well, I'd go as far as make a motion to that, Jerry.
That what, I'm sorry, Alfred, that we get it done on the 5th?
No, that the only thing we allow on that agenda
Okay,
is that.
well, it's,
I mean, I'll make the motion so that we don't have anything
Well,
else put on it if
before
we
you
have to.
before you do, the problem with making that, I understand what you're saying, and that's what I'm gonna do, But the problem with
Okay.
making a motion is, okay, if an approval not required plan comes in or something else comes in, now I'm stuck with the vote. I would like the latitude, but I will certainly go with whatever the board members want to do.
Let me ask.
I
Let
want
me
clear-
re-ask that. I'm going to re-ask that question, Jerry.
Okay,
I'd like you to poll the board members to what they believe should be on that meeting.
on the 19th.
Would you prefer that?
That's fine, good.
What?
So what I'm saying is that if we do not get through with a vote on the 5th on the ADU, I will then have it on the agenda for the 19th. And I will not, unless something needs to be done immediately, have anything else on that schedule. Any comment? Bonnie,
Yeah.
you've got a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a comment. I mean, there's no, I mean, if the warrant has already gone to the printers, then it would be fine to have something else on the agenda. So why don't we have one other thing on the agenda that can always be continued to the next meeting if we don't get to it? I mean, I just,
But
I
that's
don't
not
see-
right if somebody comes, Bonnie, I'm going to cut you off for just discussion. That's not right if somebody comes to a meeting for a specific reason. I mean, if you really want to deal with the ADU, then we should presume that that's all we're going to deal with that evening. If we get done early, we go home. But if we're there at 11 o'clock, nobody else waited in the crowd for something that didn't come up.
Right. And there's
I
nothing
mean, we
pending.
go to these meetings because that's what we volunteer to do. People don't want to sit in a meeting all night and then find out their thing isn't going to come up because it's too late.
hmm,
See, if I get an approval, if I get an A&R, approval not required plan, that comes in the last of April, I've got 21 days where we've got to really kick it out, or I've got to sign it. So if we don't get through the ADU on the 5th, I'm gonna move it, I'm gonna make sure that it's on the 19th and we get through it. But we could choose, I could certainly take it out of order and say, okay, this approval not required is going to take us all of 10 minutes. Let's get it out of the way, and then the rest of the night we can spend on the ADU. I think that we've had a number of people spending a lot of time on the ADU bylaw. I would like to get that done, over
Yeah.
with, a decision, yay, nay, or no decision whatsoever as soon as possible, so they can start planning to what they want to do and know where the board is sitting and not carry it out. That's
Okay.
all I was going for.
I understand.
Okay, David, Mead.
I agree with that. I think it's good to really focus on things sometimes anyway and just zero in on it and get it done. But that means that any other topic, with the contractor's yard definition or tree cutting bylaw or whatever that we want to discuss will happen in June.
Yes, and that's one of the reasons why, in this case, where we've got landscaping, we've got contractor's yard, we've got probably, I don't know what the ADU bylaw is going to bring up
Right.
as to potential other things that we might have to look at in the zoning in the future. So I'm trying to anticipate getting some of these housekeeping items out of the way earlier in case something comes up where we're gonna have to spend a lot of time on a bylaw in October, November.
Yeah, yeah.
Because we only meet once in July and once in August because it's the middle of summer and everybody's going in different directions. So
But that puts some real pressure on getting some things done in June. If
no,
we're-
I mean, I don't think, quite honestly, that contractor's yard is going to go too long once we narrow it down. And I think we can move on and keep going.
And then nail things down for more formally in the fall.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's generally what we do, David. I
Yeah.
mean, you can get a lot done in the summertime at one meeting. A lot of not a lot of approval not required plans come in. You got a night, we can get it done, and then we start fresh in September, and we have time.
Yeah.
And hopefully, knock on wood, hopefully we're back in person and functioning normally in September.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Olga.
Okay, go ahead.
All she had, let's see if I got this.
There's an item in the
Oh,
packet.
what she didn't give me, I don't know whether at least I didn't see it in my packet, Olga, is all she put was discuss Olga's mail. And I didn't see any mail attached with those points.
I got it.
You
It was in the email. It was,
I
in-
got
I
it
have
too.
it open. Yeah. It was
Well,
in the, it's
okay.
called
did op-
support Olga, it's called supportolga.x.
Okay. So let's do it this way. Let's keep it simple. Olga, what was the first bullet you wanted to discuss?
Well, there are two questions. One was about the codification contract. But the first, that was the second item. The first was getting opinion from town council. And I think the timing is good that we could get something formal in writing from town council about issues that we seem to have about the ADU that people contested at the meeting, and I myself didn't really understand what town council had said to you, what the health agent might have said to you, although that's separate. But I want to know, first of all, if we can drop the AADU. What does town council think about that? Are we covered by the special act of 2010? And let's hear it. You put the question, I've written it. If people want to edit it, that's fine. The second thing is, well, the second and third are about the definition of new construction. And it seemed that Michael DeVasto during our meeting said, I don't agree with you with your interpretation of Title V definition of new construction is reference to the ADU. And let's hear it from town council, like why you chose that and whether that's the way to look at it. And I'd like to get this out of the way before we look at the ADU and someone says, again, Title V new construction, you can't do it. All the ADUs are illegal. End of story. That seemed to be what happened at our meeting. So
Well, okay.
I wanted some clarification and I wanted it in writing because I didn't get it. I didn't understand where you were coming from and what exactly you had said to the town council and what town council had said to you.
Okay. Does the rest of the board want send a request for town council to weigh in on that definition that she reviewed on new construction in Title V?
Well, Jerry, I think if Mike can't read, that's an expensive way to get him to learn how to read. Because if he downloads the definition straight from Title V, it's very clear. He chose to stop reading after he heard what he wanted to hear and didn't finish and read the whole definition. So I don't want to waste town council's money or
I had the
time on
same
this.
feeling that Michael DeVasto had, the same reading. So
He
I
didn't
don't
read the definition.
I read it over and over. And
Yeah.
to
And what
me,
part
it's-
don't you
can't assume
understand?
You can't assume he didn't read it.
Okay.
And what part don't you understand that you
it isn't in front of me
adding a
right
dwelling is
now.
new construction?
Okay.
Did you not
We
read
know
the
where-
definition?
We know where David Rowell is.
Jesus.
Well, and then it's
Anybody
Title
else?
V. What does that have to do with our bylaws? That's the other question.
It's a separate issue.
Maybe it's
wouldn't write-
separate, so,
You wouldn't write a bylaw, in my opinion, and I'm not going to answer the Title V question, but you don't write a bylaw that's already got something from a different department that says you can't do it, if that's what it says, Olga. There's no sense in that. All
Right.
that does is create a legal battle and I'm not going to say which, I'm going to use boards for discussion only, between the zoning board, the Board of Health, and Santa Claus, because if one says you can and one says you can't, then that doesn't make any sense. If both of them are online saying you can do something, then I have no problem dealing with it. But if we're told one says no, and I'm just saying we're only being told this, I will listen to the arguments both sides. But there's no sense in doing anything if Title V stops you.
Okay,
So, I mean, do you honestly believe, from what you've read, that Title V has no hindrance in this at all?
I think it has something to do with whether one can go forward, but I think the interpretation of what new construction is not exactly what was reported to us. I've read it. I read it over and over. I didn't bring it with me. I can probably pull it out somewhere, but that's not why we're here. If
Well, I don't think
everybody
it's-
else thinks
I
that,
don't
it-
think it's up, quite honestly, I don't think it's up to us to try. If this is what you're asking, the board has got to vote on it, but I don't think it's up to us to beat you to death as to the way you read a particular definition. Obviously, David Rowell has read the definition and feels completely different than you do. I have stated, I have read the definition and I agree with David Rowell. I have also said that I have talked to the building inspector. I have also said that I have talked to town council. They both agree with David Rowell and they agree with me. So a majority of the people, at least I've talked to, disagree with the interpretation from you and from other
Select-
people.
yes.
However, if it is, and I have absolutely no problem, if the board feels that they would like to have town council weigh in because they have a difference of opinion on that definition, then that majority says, yes, we'll send it up to town council and have town council write an opinion and send it back to us as to what her interpretation of that definition is. And that's basically, from what I can tell, that's simply the question you're asking. Can we send it up to town council?
Mhm.
And if the board wants to send it up, majority vote, then that's what it is. Bonnie,
I would like to support, getting an opinion from town council. I would like to make the question a little more specific. Because
Okay.
I think we all understand that creating a new building is new construction. I read it at the time that we were having all the discussions, and like Olga, I don't have it in front of me. And I'm not, this is not my specialty, but it did seem to me that there was some, possible variance for the situation of somebody in an existing building creating like a little mother-in-law apartment in the basement.
No.
Well, no, I mean, yes, you disagree, but
we
there's a
all
lot of
disagreed.
people
Yeah,
who don't agree with you, David.
yeah.
So-
We all disagreed on basically that premise, the premise that the building inspector, town council, so you all are in the same wavelength again, as well as David and myself, is that anything that requires a certificate of occupancy is considered new construction. So if you have a single-family house and you add on a bedroom, you don't have to get a certificate of occupancy because you already have one. You're simply getting a building permit to add on that bedroom. When you add a kitchen, that is a new dwelling and it is a specific dwelling, you will most likely need a certificate of occupancy. If
Because your
you
insurance
need-
would require it.
if you need a certificate of occupancy, the way we are reading it is that the definition in Title V says that's new construction and that you have to bring the septic system up to current code with no variances. That's the basic premise. Town council has said, in addition that I reported, is there are some lots within the town of Wellfleet that if they're on town water, for example, that septic system goes out the door, you can build additional units. If
Correct.
you have probably a 4 or 5 acre parcel, or 3 acre parcel, and you haven't maxed out your bedrooms, you could build a ADU. But for the most part, within a town that is a majority of well and septic, that has a very fragile aquifer, it is difficult and limited as to the amount of units you will be able to build. That's the overall picture of what town council came up with. Town council didn't say you can't do it. There is going to be exceptions to every rule, and we're going to have them. But it seemed to be clear to a number of us that if in fact a certificate of occupancy is required under state mandated 1995 regulation, then that triggers and is the definition of new construction. And David is, and forget who mentioned it, David did hit the point that the individual reading the definition, if they don't read it carefully enough, they can think that whole thing applies and protects and is geared to 95 pre-season 90 or pre-95. The last sentence is what is the killer, is regardless of it, of a septic system being in 95, it's protected. But the minute you add a new dwelling, which requires a certificate of occupancy, that's the
That
trigger.
negates it. Yeah.
Right. So
Didn't finish the sentence.
Town council will sum up the discussions I had with her. And if the request is made by the board, she'll sum it up, she'll put it in writing, and she'll send it down to us. And that will be her interpretation. You will get another attorney who probably may feel differently. That's why you have attorneys.
We can limit that,
We all
though.
read things a little bit differently, but that's just the overall view of that particular issue. So it comes down to one person on this board can't just arbitrarily request town council anymore.
Right.
We need a vote from the board to whether or not we want to send it up to town council. And I have absolutely no problem with sending it to town council.
I do, and I'll tell you why.
Okay. Yep.
I'm sorry. I mean, I'm going to go next. And
No.
Then we can vote on it if you'd like.
Yep.
My problem is I believe the health department is kind of on the fence with this.
Yeah.
And I'm not so sure that at this point, if an AADU went in front of them, that they would turn it down. And I don't want to be speaking for the board, but I got a feeling.
No,
Okay.
planning board.
Anyways, no, the Board of Health, David, I think that they still have latitude because they haven't been instructed and they're interpreting it the way they need to help people, the locals.
Correct.
And I'm going to stop right there for that discussion.
Because
But
if you
my-
formalize it, the ship is sunk.
My problem is, yes, if town council comes back with a letter stated in the way that Jerry says that it may. I'm not agreeing with Jerry for discussion. I think that
Yep.
Jerry, I agree with you guys in the reading of it because it scared me the first time I read it. My concern is if town council comes back with that determination, we are screwed. If town council
Yeah.
doesn't, if town council comes back and says that we're all wrong and unicorns and leprechauns, it's fine. But think about it before you ask the question. I believe the board of some committee right now is still doing the best they can to help people in that situation. If town council comes back with a negativeness, you're going to pull the carpet out from under those people.
They won't be able to do anything.
That's my
I
opinion.
I didn't go that far. I will tell you, Olga, that I have not had a conversation with either the health agent or the Board of Health. What started all of this was that we were requested to review ADU because we have a housing crisis on Cape Cod, and the Cape Cod Commission felt that this was a way to open up additional rental property that would help the locals. It's sort of like when in 1995, to me anyway, who was around in 1995 in the construction business, when the state of when Cape Cod Commission was pushing all of the planning boards to go to 1 acre zoning that didn't have town water or town sewage. That was a blanket recommendation, just like this ADU was. They felt that that was the answer. They were getting pushback. We had a group of individuals within the town of Wellfleet that said, oh, that's a good idea. Planning board said no. They pushed for it. And what happened was not everybody, I'm sorry, a large number of individuals that had larger parcels that was staring at present 20,000 square foot lots in Wellfleet, all of a sudden were being bombarded with, we need to go to 1 acre zoning. And they had enough land to get a couple lots, but not a couple lots if they had 2 acres and more. Did perimeter plans to freeze the zoning for 3 years. And the state of Massachusetts stepped in because a lot of the planning boards didn't go to 1 acre zoning, said, no, we're not ready to do that. They went to the state, and the state mandated that we go to 1995 regulations. They drew the laws for the entire state of Massachusetts, and they drew those laws with an overview that every town was the same. That you had to put in leach fields instead of leach pits. You had to put in 1,500 gallon tanks instead of 1,000 gallon tanks. And in the North Shore, in the western part of the state where you had ledge, they'd been using those kind of systems all along because they couldn't do a leach pit because it was all ledge. So they had to dig shallow, and it proved to work out well. So they passed it for the entire state. Whereas on the Cape, we had septic systems that were in place for 40, 50 years. some of them which were 20 feet apart. And there was no problem because it percolated very quickly underneath that sand.
That's not the truth, Jerry. Our shit doesn't stink. That's why.
So, thank you, David. So,
Okay.
so, you know, now we get this situation where all of a sudden we need the ADUs, which everybody knows we need affordable housing. But that was made for across the entire Barnstable County.
Yeah.
They
Could
didn't
I
really
make,
take into consideration, wait a minute, Bonnie, they didn't take into consideration the fact that some of those towns had town water and town sewage. That was no problem to pass an ADU. If they had come back, and they've had a lot of choices, because we've been talking about this for a while, and said, listen, we've researched it, and here's the problems we face. This is what you're going to need to do when you go and pass it. Fine, but we haven't heard a word about that. So that's why I at least said, all right, in planning, we don't go to conservation, we don't go to Board of Health, we don't go other places. But in planning, my feeling is that we plan. We look at the overall zoning bylaw that we're trying to pass and say, is it, now to like Alfred was saying, is it a workable plan? Is it feasible? Are the numbers at least there to make this program work? And that's why when David chimed in, and I think you all realize he chimed in early, and said, listen, read the bylaw, read the health regulations, 95. I hadn't read them for years on end. I hadn't read them because I wasn't there. But when we started looking at the ADU and expanding it, that I looked at it. So all of this is coming back to the point, okay, how much do we want to bring to light?
Not much at the moment.
At this moment in time? Or do we want to wait and see and analyze what the ADU bylaw by petition is all about, what has been written, and what as a planning board we are going to do about the bylaw? Are we going to recommend it? Are we not going to recommend it? Are we going to have no recommendation? If, and as I said, I will, if the vote is to send it up, I will do as you wish. I will of course send it up. But if during the discussion that's going to start, as I was corrected on the 5th of May, on the ADU, if part of it, and I don't really know if any of it is going to be even geared to whether or not a Title V status of new construction is a question, or is there a bigger question on the ADU that is going to be discussed, have other major issues that the planning board isn't even going to want to discuss and vote down, which makes everything academic because we're not going to recommend it. So I'm saying I don't think it's too late to send this up. If you want to wait also to say, all right, let's see, let's review, let's get some public input if there is any, and see what in fact the board, the petitioners, because there is no board attached to it, the petitioners have sent to the planning board as a petitioned article, and how we feel about the entire article. Because remember, we cannot change as a board on a petitioned article a single comma. It is what it is. So there may be something in there that far outweighs even getting to the septic situation. I don't know. We have, and I'm looking at you because you're dead on in the middle of the screen right behind me, right below me, is I don't know myself until we get to that public meeting. So I can send it up if you want to send it up. I'm not sure town council will get to it before that meeting. I will certainly ask if the will of this board is to ask that we get something, but that may be premature if in fact what petitioned article that we look at is not even going to be recommended by us in the first place. I don't know that till we have a hearing and see it and discuss it. So I think that may lead into what Alfred said, and I think that's what I was leading to, is that maybe we don't need to rush into it as quickly as you may want to, until we really get into the discussion and the merits of what is the petitioned article that is before the planning board. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, makes sense to me.
I see a question in Bonnie's face, and I see a question in Olga's face. So
Yeah, I want to make sure that we don't shade into the discussion that we're not supposed to have, since it wasn't on.
not discussing the ADU bylaw itself.
Right, we're not discussing the ADU bylaw, but we are discussing what led us to have all these reservations earlier. So that's kind of my point of order there. But I think in terms of getting a legal opinion, I think what we're talking about is how to come to the public meeting as well informed as we can be. That was the point of Olga's request.
Yep.
I actually have pulled up the definition of new construction while we've been meeting, but I wasn't able to put it in chat because chat's disabled. But I think that it's like all the for our information, it would be maybe from the building inspector, if not from the town council. I would really like to have all the relevant regulations in front of me and be able to study it before the meeting.
If you have the definition, you should be able to read it and understand it.
Oh, come on, David.
David,
No,
I think it's pretty clear.
No, you're being condescending, so stop
I would rather personally see it come from town council rather than from the building inspector, because the building inspector now would be put in a position where they've got to take and make a decision that really is outside of his bailiwick.
Yeah.
He simply answered, we simply discussed with each other as to, what we clarified with each other as builders, certificate of occupancy and the definition of new construction. And as two individuals involved in construction, we looked at, when is a certificate of occupancy required? The obvious question, of course, is new construction if you're building a single family new dwelling. All right. But the way it was reading and the way he read it is to say, if a certificate of occupancy is required on an existing property, a new certificate of title, that's a new building, whether it's in or outside of the building itself that was already there.
Yeah, I understand the point you're making. I understand.
So I'd much rather, Bonnie, if the board wants to see that, I'd like to keep, it's not, the word integrity is wrong. I'd rather keep the building inspector in the building inspector's realm and the Board of Health in their realm. And we're not, as a planning board, I'm not challenging either one of them. It's certainly not my purview to challenge either one of them. It's simply an overview as a planning board is to look at the overall and say, gee, if a definition is in state law that is limiting what we're discussing as a zoning bylaw, we really should look at it. but I'm not looking to put those two people that work for the town of Wellfleet at odds with each other. And I don't think we as a planning board should.
Okay.
So, Olga,
And I guess I wanted to say that it seemed, I can't remember which meeting, but there was a meeting when I had produced a version of a bylaw that took away the AADU and essentially just did an ADU. And at that meeting, we killed it. The meeting came to the conclusion that it was impossible because of this definition, and therefore we never really worked on a bylaw. It went to another group of people because we had said it doesn't work. And if we really think that, I'm assuming that our vote come the hearing is going to be the same. And I think I want better clarification about, is this really what's going on? That's, you know, because we could have worked on it and we didn't because we were told that's it. It isn't going to work. We could have put in our 2 cents and worked on it, you know, maybe not as fast as this one committee did, but now we're at a point where we're going to have to review it, vote, recommend or not, and maybe there'll be a, you know, 3-4 or whatever, 1-5, but let's do it informed. And I'm not worried about what this will mean down the line. I think there's going to be some conflicts perhaps, and they will have to be resolved. But I don't want to throw this ADU bylaw out without really understanding and getting a legal opinion on it that I can see. I mean, with all due respect to you, Jerry, you told us, I don't know what you asked, and I don't know what the legal counsel told you, except by your reporting. And I would like, and that's why I added to this email that there's a new policy by the the select board, that whenever legal counsel is requested, it should be in writing and the answer should be in writing. So I'm saying, given that, that's what I want.
okay, we know what you want. So is everybody at a point where they feel on this particular issue, they've heard enough? Are you willing to vote? Wait a minute, I'm sorry. I gotta have a motion to send the question up to town council.
I got a question before you make that motion. And it's not detrimental to Olga. I want to be very clear. Was there anything else on her bullet list that contained to this? I do not have her bullet list.
Oh,
Well, you got it in the packet.
Well, there was,
I don't have my packet. I apologize for that. That's why I'm asking what else is on Olga's bullet list.
Oh, you did.
we can read it aloud, but
Please.
right. Literally what I wrote was, can the AADU be dropped in its entirety if there is a new ADU bylaw? Because the affordability feature of the Special Act of 2010 appears to be independent of the current bylaw. That was, I think Jerry reported that the town council was intrigued. That didn't settle for me.
But
So
that was
that's
those are your bullet questions.
Yeah, that was the first
one.
question. The
And
second and third are almost alike, but number 2 is, does the definition of new construction, and then in parentheses, in our bylaws or other regulations, close parens, put existing AADUs in non-compliance? And then bullet 3, does the definition of new construction under Title V regulations and or Wellfleet's Board of Health regulations have any bearing on Wellfleet's zoning bylaw? or
So-
bylaws. I mean,
So
Oh, so
basically,
you're not asking about the ADU bylaw, you're asking about all those zoning bylaws in general?
and I really am, because if we're going to take a definition from a state regulation and apply it and say, this isn't legal because of that definition in those regulations, I just want to be clear that that's the proper thing to do. Or are our zoning bylaws like an entity of itself and it must be consistent, but it doesn't have to meet something else somewhere else? I just want clarification.
So I would like to make a motion.
Wait a minute.
No?
Yeah, but wait a minute, please. Number one, you're asking town council, I think, Olga,
Mm-hmm.
should we throw away the ADU bylaw
Mm-hmm.
because we have a new petitioned article for ADU?
That's not a question for town council.
Not a question for, yeah, it's not a question for town council. Number one, town council hasn't seen the bylaw. How is town council going to answer that question when they haven't even seen the bylaw?
Well, let me put it this way.
And
This,
it's not up to town council. It's not up to town council to add or subtract
Bylaws.
separate bylaw by petition. They don't weigh in on it unless somebody at town meeting says, is this legal? And then they would have to answer that. But it's not something we would ask them ahead of time. It's whether or not we want to approve it. But she has nothing, she or he, whoever it gets, when it gets sent up, whoever gets it, but they don't have it.
well, what if we give it to them? And just say, that's the bylaw says, this is to replace AADU. That's what the bylaw.
We haven't even opened the hearing.
Yeah, I haven't opened the hearing yet. It hasn't been advertised yet. It's not.
But there is
It's not
something.
public,
that-
it's not our bylaw. Normally, under this, Olga, we would send at least to my experience, if we were working on a bylaw, before we ever advertise that bylaw, we would send it to town councils for their review and changes to make it legal. They would send it back, we would have more meetings on it, and finally, when it's drafted and then resent to town council, and town council says, okay, it's now at a point where it's legal. I've read it. You can now advertise it. Then we would advertise it. In this case, we're being handed a petitioned article that neither the planning board nor town council can change. We are not discussing that article, number one, because it hasn't even been advertised yet. It's not in front of the public. We can't discuss it, and it hasn't been sent up to town council yet.
Mhm.
So these are
You can't ask the
these are
question.
pertinent these are very pertinent questions to this bylaw, probably by petition during our discussion when we have a hearing. So when we open the hearing on the 5th,
Mhm.
one of the reasons why this puts this timetable that whether or not we did it or whether or not it was done by petition. When you put something of this nature, of this, for a more simpler word, magnitude,
Mhm.
zoning bylaw change on the books, you need time to get it to town council to be vented. So in this case, when we open the hearing on the 5th, if we have questions like, okay, if we recommend this bylaw, a bylaw. I gotta figure how I'm speaking here. If we recommend a petitioned article, or going to recommend a petition article, do we have a legal problem with the second clause? We have every right to send that up to town council and ask the question. Town council come back and says, no, that's against Mass General Law, that's against our zoning bylaws. No, that does not fit.
Mhm.
We then decide, okay, do we recommend it, not recommend, recommend, or no recommendation? If town council comes back and says, okay, you've been handed a article by petition, you've advertised it, you've had a public meeting, you've opened the meeting, you have legal questions. We move that to the next meeting, send it up to town council, and say, okay, here are our questions. You get those questions answered, they come back. And in this case, we have time because the only thing at this point is we know this petitioned article, as it's being presented to us for discussion on the 5th of May, will be on the town warrant for the next town meeting.
Mhm.
It will be on the town warrant with every I and with every T exactly the same as that it was submitted to us. Because we can't change it, nobody can change it. However, if we don't make a decision in a timely manner to get it on the warrant, we, as I said before, will make an oral presentation. We have all the way up until June, if we're gonna even meet on town meeting in June, as to get our decision. So if that thing is loaded with questions, we're gonna send it to town council. So that's why I'm saying that you have the ability to say, all right, are you gonna go and send a question, this question that you're proposing on definition? But what about if there's 3 more questions that have to go up to town council after we have the hearing? Or during the hearings?
Mhm.
Wouldn't it be proper to take all of our questions and send them up at the same time? Or if we look at the bylaw and say, you know what? Regardless of all of our questions, there is a stumbling block that the majority of the planning board can't even get over. All of these questions are academic because we're going to vote it down on that reason that has nothing to do with town council. So my feeling is, again, I will do whatever you say, but my feeling is that why not wait until you have the zoning petitioned article in front of you and we're able to discuss it and we put all of our questions together, if we have any, which I'm sure we're already, because if we don't do it now, we're going to have your questions. But it's premature to ask town council, I think, at this point, whether or not to abandon the AADU when we don't even know what's there. I mean, you have the information in front of you, we can't discuss it, but
We haven't opened it.
you haven't opened it. So I think you're going to have more than one question, or you're going to have an overwhelming disagreement on the bylaw that doesn't even enter into what we talked about before.
Is it public at this point who submitted the petitioned article?
Yes, it was not submitted by, and Olga certainly can speak up because she may not want to, but theoretically, this was not submitted by any board. I'm not too sure the process was, people weighed in that I don't believe should have weighed in.
But the housing task force or
No, they're
The
not.
local, the
no.
local housing partnership, I think, voted to petition it. Are they?
Not to my
And-
knowledge. The way I understand that it came in, it did not come in from a
Town entity?
non-entity within the town of Wellfleet. Now.
Well, then
non-
we should
the
know who it
entity
came in
is
from.
Made up of people, but the way I understand from the treasurer, it was submitted by an individual, not by a committee.
And the answer, I think, is both.
Well,
Not the way I got the information.
Double speak.
So Olga, what's your answer?
That the local housing partnership submitted it and an individual submitted it.
Can't have two individuals submitting the article, I'm sorry.
Well, one's the
it-
local housing partnership and one's an individual. That was what I understood had been done.
No, as far as I know, Olga, and the treasurer is the one that you can go directly to. As
Mhm.
far as I know, the treasurer told me that the article came in because I had to be notified that in fact it came in because she's the person that gets it. And
Uh-huh.
then it got referred up to the select board. The select board then kicks it back to the planning board. We cannot do anything until the planning board, they can't start the advertising, they can't do anything. And the way I understand from the town treasurer, I mean, she did hit me when I was being accosted coming in the back door of town hall. So I had a few things on my mind, but the way I understand it, it was petitioned by an individual with the correct number of signatures.
10.
Yeah, yes.
The only reason I asked that question was if it came from the housing task force.
No.
The Board of Selectmen could authorize them to use town council, but it sounds like that's not their option.
No, because town council, no, in this case, town council, according to town hall, was never notified. It came in as an individual and they did not have access to town council.
I mean, I'm ready for a question of some sort. It's just the fact that I'm afraid that when we open this can of worms, we're not going to get what we want.
I don't want to open it now.
Well, I agree with you, David. But I mean, if the rest of the board wants to do that, that's their choice. If we make a motion,
Okay,
And
one second.
I'm just concerned. That's
Yeah.
all.
David Mead Fox, I don't want to vote from you. Where are you thinking? need
I
some-
think it's premature to ask this question of town council. I think the process that's been laid out is reasonable to me. We have plenty of time to still consult with town council about something that's more specific. It just feels too hypothetical and it feels premature to me.
Okay, thank you, David. So Olga, I did that for a reason.
Mhm.
And rather than, to just keep on bouncing this back and forth. I think that there is going to be questions by you, probably by Bonnie, maybe by David, maybe by somebody else when we open this meeting. But I do think, I agree with David Mead, I agree with David Rowell, and I agree with Alfred, that the time to send things up to town council is all at once. Once we open that meeting and decide what, if necessary, we even need town council's input. Because we may not need town councils. The vote may go in a direction doesn't even need it.
But we're going to vote on it without this information.
You may, if there's something in there that all of a sudden the majority of the members of the board decide that they can't live with, that doesn't have anything to do with health. Yes,
And is the turnaround with town council, I've heard it's long, and that's why I asked.
it is long, but it's also a situation where town council understands when you ask them a question. Let's see if I can put it this way. If we had a question for town council for contractor's yard,
Mhm.
and we sent it up to town council in June,
Mhm.
the chances are real good that that would sit on town council's desk for a while. And the reason why is because probably other towns that they represent are having town meetings, and they realize that the town of Wellfleet can't do anything with zoning bylaws until the next town meeting, which is in 2022, June. That if it sits on their desk for a couple weeks, 3 weeks, not a problem. They also realize that when a town has submitted a warrant and they're discussing the articles that are going to be on that warrant, because the town council and the board of selectmen are already talking about this current warrant, they know that when a question is asked that is going to need a response at town meeting, they put that at the priority list and kick it out. So for example, Eastham is, I think, a couple months after we are. If we send up a request, Town of Wellfleet sent up a request for town meeting, which is 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks away, and Eastham is 2 months away, we're gonna get our answer quickly. They're gonna make Eastham wait a little bit. That's just the way.
Because we're a better town.
Yes, we're a better town. But to answer
Yeah,
your
thank you.
question, turnaround is quicker when it's necessary. And when you have something of this nature, that's a legal question, they will get back to us. Yeah. So right now, you've got 4 against 2 of you to say it's going not to send it up, just so you know. You can make the motion, we can go through it, but right now you're looking at 4 of us that are saying, let's wait, let's open the hearing, let's see what questions come up, and let's see if it's at all even necessary. And if it is necessary, there's going to be more than one question. I'm sure there is.
Mhm.
Okay?
All right. Bonnie, do you want to withdraw a motion if you even started
I
one?
didn't even start the motion.
I don't, that's why I
Don't
cut
drop
it,
it
that's why I
then.
kind of cut her off is
Right.
I will never cut anybody off for making a motion, but at least I didn't want the motion on the floor and all of a sudden have to go through all this.
No, Jerry, you cut me off. Come on.
I do understand that the town administrator is the one who decides when and what goes to town council. Is that correct?
No, it would, no, the wording of what's on the document you sent us says it's also the select board.
Run that by me again, Olga?
I think that any questions to town council are approved by the TA. And
Because
then,
it costs money. She has to. Yeah. She
yeah,
has to.
no,
by
I mean,
statute.
that's in
Yeah.
the equation too.
So
Yes,
it's
No,
either
we're
the
already-
town
no,
administrator
no,
or the
we're-
select board.
We're already,
Or the select board, but
Rebecca has already put it in the SKU that we're going to have some questions on the town council. It's already in the time limit.
yeah, she told me that she did that because it takes so long.
Well, it costs money, so they have to approve it, so we're not
They
just
have to
wasting
approve
resources.
Yes, but
They-
you can approve or not quickly, whether it costs money or not.
Well,
I,
It,
I can
it costs money,
disagree.
period,
I
to
can
talk to
disagree.
town council.
I don't particularly like the process. Not because I'm just the chair. I feel when the Board of Selectmen made this decision that they did not take into consideration certain boards. They kind of lumped all the boards together.
Mhm.
When we as a planning board ask a question of town council, it's not a curiosity question. It's a pointed question.
Mhm.
And I'm not to say that, I'm not to say that we're the most important board in town, but when we have.
But we
to
dress the
voting-
best.
But we are up there. And when we have to prepare zoning bylaws or review zoning bylaws that require a 2/3 vote on town meeting floor, we need answers and we need them fairly quickly.
Mhm.
So normally in the past, we were able, when they had this by something like this before, a chair was able to get into the TA and say, okay, here's my problem. And they would say, all right, fine, go
Okay.
for it. I don't know. I would hope that if the planning board submitted, I'm just going to pick a number, I'll go 5 questions for town council. I would hope that the TA or the selectmen, however they've got this thing worded, would say, well, wait a minute, we think you should ask these 3 questions, but throw the other 2 out.
Mhm.
You know, as it's been said before, when, you know, and I see David Mead's hands up, so I'm going to call him. As David Mead said before, gee, when you look at one zoning bylaw, we need to look at a number of them. Well, that's the problem. When we ask a question, many times it leads to more questions. So we need some broad statements. So, you know, hopefully they get an answer to it. Yes, David Mead.
I just want to say, stepping back a little bit, that I appreciate the intent of what Olga's asking for, more information, more clarity. And I also want to say that the good news in this is that, just for a moment to speak for all of us, I think we all care deeply about having more and better affordable housing in Wellfleet. That's the good news. We share that, and it's stating the obvious. I think, and I would hope that we can, when we need to, go back to that simple reality that we all want to work on this problem and make it work better. I've heard it from everybody at multiple meetings. So I'm just asking all of us to remember that we share a dedication to this town and to making there be, one way or another, more and better housing for a wide range of people. That's all.
And
David, I
Ralph,
totally agree with you, but you also got to qualify. It's 9 o'clock. That's your job.
All right. I was going to do it at 8 o'clock.
I think
Okay.
with that, David Mead, I think it goes with, there are a number of things we've already done that no one's taken advantage of, that, you know, you just got to throw enough stuff, small stuff against the wall and hope something sticks.
Yeah.
But there are, affordable housing is a big problem everywhere.
Right.
But affordable housing is not just driven by the need of needing affordable housing. Each municipality is driven by certain restrictions on what they can do. And it's sort of like, why did the state say, they passed a law of, listen, we realize every town in the Commonwealth can't take care of housing. So we have to go to those towns that can, especially those towns that have town water and town sewage, to take care of high density affordability. And that's one of the reasons that Wellfleet is hindered, is unlike Eastham, which now has town water and town sewage everywhere. Completely different situation.
What we really need is need-based funding to upgrade all these septic systems that need upgrading throughout the town. Huge amount of money, but think about the difference that would make climate, environmentally, but also in terms of affordable housing.
Yeah, and it's also a matter of it. I do not mean under any circumstances to downplay affordable housing, but we are going to be reaching, in my mind, very shortly. It hasn't hit us yet, but it's going to at some point. Even not adding another single dwelling is not going to be the tipping iceberg. The tipping iceberg is going to be our areas that is such a very, very small lens between the fresh water and salt water that's going to break through, that those areas are going to have to be brought town water just to survive the buildings that are there, never mind a single new dwelling. just to protect the buildings that are there.
Oh, and then
So
there's
keep the,
and
Yeah.
storm surges that are going to be bigger. That's another thing.
That's another thing. So, okay, with
But-
that, we've moved on. Minutes. Karen, you
they're
still with me?
beautiful.
Yeah, Karen's still there.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, minutes,
Motion?
motion.
I said it's
Second,
beautiful motion.
Do you make a motion?
Sure, I make a motion, we approve these minutes.
Okay, any
I'll,
second?
I'll second it.
All right, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
I,
Aye.
Done. Okay,
Can,
I don't think I missed anything on the agenda. So,
I have a
Right, Olga.
question.
Is the
Oh, I'm
WZBL
sorry.
regulation language, is that the thing that we already discussed?
I'm
About
sorry,
The WZBL regulation language.
Wellfleet zoning bylaw regulation language, changes to the regulation language and use tables.
Was
I
that?
did that, no, I did that, Bonnie. Remember
just to
that
keep, yeah,
this is a public agenda. So
Yeah, right.
we can't discuss anything that the general public has not been made aware of. So
Right,
by
right,
putting
right.
changes to the Wellfleet zoning bylaw, I wanted to connect into if contractor's yard, to now David Mead's point, led into any other zoning bylaw definition. I wanted to
Okay.
make sure that no one could come back to me and say, oh,
Oh,
Jerry, you discussed open storage definition and it wasn't on the bylaw. Well, I know that's broad, but that covers me.
Oh, okay, so that's the discussion we already had. Okay.
And I'm trying always to cover my backside. Because I have too many people looking over my shoulder. Olga,
under meeting minutes, December 15th meeting is not posted. And maybe that's because we never approved those meeting minutes. So I just put that out there.
what
I
was
did-
it? I'm sorry, what was the date?
December 15th, if I've got that right. I think we received meeting minutes, but because it's not on the webpage for planning board, I suddenly
Okay.
realized maybe we didn't approve them.
All right.
So
Karen,
someone should look into that.
Yeah. I
would
hear
you
you.
do, would you do me a favor? Would you get a hold of Rebecca
Okay.
and ask her that question from Bonnie as to, I'm sorry, from Olga, December 15th meeting? Did we in fact
2020.
approve them? I'm sorry?
2020, of course.
I'm sorry, Olga, what?
The year 2020, that's all
Yeah,
I
okay.
said.
December 15th, 2020.
Hmm.
Did we approve the minutes, number one? If so, they didn't appear on the town website. If not, we need them resubmitted at the next meeting so we can approve them. Because if we
Yes,
did
sir.
approve them, if she's got record that we did approve them, then in fact, it was an oversight, they just didn't get posted. If in fact, she sent them in the packet, but we didn't get to them, then we need to vote on them, so we can get them.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah.
So everybody knows that the only thing that will be on the agenda on the 5th will be the ADU for discussion.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yep.
I thank you very much. Appreciate
Very
it.
good.
Thank
Have a
you.
good night.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Karen.
Oh, you're welcome. Have a good one.
You too.